The snow had turned crimson beneath me, each flake landing soft and pure before soaking up the warmth still leaking from my body. I couldn't feel the cold anymore. That had passed somewhere between the 3rd mile and whenever my legs finally gave out. Now there was only the strange, cotton-wrapped silence of a winter forest and the slower, quieter rhythm of my heart, deciding whether to keep fighting. I'd always imagined my wedding day differently. Not the ceremony itself. I'd never been foolish enough to dream about that. Girls like me, bartered between packs like livestock to seal treaties we'd never understand. We learned early not to waste wishes on white dresses or flower crowns. But I had imagined surviving it. Making it through the vows, the binding ritual, the cold press of a stranger's ring against my finger. I'd imagined enduring. I hadn't imagined running. The forest smelled of pine and something older. Something that lived in the spaces between trees where sunlight never quite reached. My father used to tell me stories about these woods, back when he still looked at me like I was his daughter instead of his most valuable trading piece. He said the ancient packs hunted here, the ones who remembered what we'd all forgotten about being wolves, the ones who didn't pretend to be civilized. "Stay away from the northern territories, little one," he'd whispered once, braiding my pale hair before bed. "That's where the monsters live." I'd asked him what made them monsters. He never answered. Now, lying in their snow with my blood-painting patterns only they would understand, I thought maybe I'd find out. The wedding had been set for sunset, traditional for pack alliances, symbolic of 2 families merging as day surrendered to night. Rowan Ashford, the Alpha's son from the Eastern Territories, had arrived 3 days early with an entourage that spoke more of military occupation than celebration. I'd watched from my bedroom window as they transformed our modest pack house into something that looked like a fortress. Guards at every entrance, patrols circling the perimeter. His father's enforcers, cold-eyed men who'd served in the territorial wars, positioning themselves like chess pieces around our home. My stepmother Celeste had been delighted. "Security," she'd purred, adjusting the silver combs in her dark hair. "It shows how much they value this union. I'd seen it differently. It looked like containment. The dress they'd chosen hung in my room like a ghost. White silk that would have made me look even more washed out. Even more invisible than I already felt. I'd touched it once, felt the quality of the fabric, understood exactly how much I was worth in meters of expensive cloth and imported lace. Not enough to ask if I wanted this. Not enough to notice I'd stopped eating. Not enough to see the bruises Rowan's accidentally too firm grips left on my arms during our chaperoned meetings. The morning of the wedding, I'd woken before dawn to find a note slipped under my door. The handwriting was feminine, rushed, the paper cheap. Servant stock, not the formal stationery my family used for important correspondence. He killed his last intended. They said it was an accident. It wasn't. Run. My hands had shaken so badly I nearly tore the paper. I'd spent an hour trying to convince myself it was a cruel joke, maybe from one of my stepsisters who'd always resented that father chose me for this alliance instead of them. But something in my gut, that instinct my father said I'd inherited from my mother's bloodline, knew it was true. I'd seen something in Rowan's eyes during our meetings, something that woke up when I flinched. So I ran. I'd made it farther than I expected, honestly. Nearly 5 miles through the forest in a thin nightdress and stolen boots, my pale hair streaming behind me like a surrender flag I couldn't pull down. I'd run until my lungs burned and my feet bled, and the wedding bells I'd imagined hearing became the pounding of my own pulse in my ears. Then I'd heard the howls, not Rowan's pack. I would have recognized their hunting calls, the coordinated patterns they used to flush prey toward waiting jaws. These were different, deeper. They echoed through the forest like something fundamental, like the voice of the mountains themselves deciding to speak. I'd stumbled, caught my foot on a root hidden beneath the snow, and gone down hard. Something had torn, inside, where I couldn't see it. The pain had been immediate and consuming, spreading through my abdomen like spilled ink. That's when the bleeding started. I'd tried to get up. Tried 3 times, actually, each attempt weaker than the last. The snow beneath me had grown warmer, which I knew meant I was getting colder. My body playing tricks, shutting down the alarms that might have saved me. Above, through the bare branches, The sky had lightened to that peculiar gray that comes before true dawn. Birds should have been singing. Nothing sang. The howls had grown closer. I'd stopped trying to run then. What was the point? If Rowan found me, I'd face whatever truth that note had warned about. If these northern wolves found me first, these monsters my father had cautioned against, well, maybe monsters were just honest about what they were. Maybe that was better than the alternative. The footsteps, when they came, were too quiet for something that should have made sound. I'd heard them more as a change in pressure. The way the air moved differently when something large displaced it. My vision had started to tunnel, the edges going soft and dark. But I'd managed to turn my head. He stood between two ancient pines. And even dying, even with my sight failing, I understood why they called him the Alpha King. He was massive. Not just tall, but built like something carved from the mountains themselves, all brutal angles and contained power. His hair was dark, nearly black, and long enough to touch his shoulders. He wore furs and leather that looked like they'd been made by hands that understood survival, not fashion. But it was his eyes that held me. They were amber, but not the warm honey gold of common wolves. These were the color of fire through smoke, ancient and knowing and completely, utterly inhuman. He was looking at me like I was a puzzle. His head tilted slightly, nostrils flared as he scented the air, reading me. Reading the blood, the fear, the snow slowly claiming my body. Behind him, others emerged from the trees. 6 of them, all male, all radiating that same barely leashed danger. His pack, his elite guard. I could tell by the way they positioned themselves, instinctively forming a protective semicircle around their leader, even as they assessed whether I was a threat. As if I could threaten anything in this state. Ashford's bride, one of them said, his voice carrying disgust. I can smell their claiming marks all over her trail. Not on me. I'd made sure of that. But they'd marked the territory I'd fled through, making sure anyone who found me would know who I belonged to. The Alpha King moved closer, and despite everything, my heart rate picked up. Prey instinct. He crouched beside me, so close I could see the scars that traced his knuckles, the thin white line that ran along his jaw. Close enough that I could smell him. Winter pine and smoke and something wilder. Something that made my wolf stir weakly inside me. Please, I managed. My voice barely a whisper. Not begging for my life, I was past that. Begging for something I didn't have words for. His hand moved, and I'd flinched. Couldn't help it, automatic as breathing. Something flickered across his face, too fast for me to name. She's bleeding internally, another voice said, colder than the first. Won't last another hour. Good, the first one replied. Let the Ashfords find her corpse. Sends a message about their territory claims. The Alpha King hadn't looked away from me. His hand hovered over my shoulder, not touching, just present. His eyes searched my face, and I wondered what he saw. A political pawn? An enemy? Just another dying wolf? Who hurt you? His voice was nothing like I'd expected. Low and rough, yes. But there was something in it that made my chest ache. I'd wanted to laugh. Who hadn't? Does it matter? I'd whispered instead. His jaw tightened. It might. One of his pack members stepped closer. Dominic, we don't have time for this. The Ashfords will have trackers out by now. If they find us on their claimed territory with her, this isn't their territory, Dominic said, his voice dropping into something that wasn't quite a growl, but made every wolf instinct I had snap to attention. This hasn't been their territory for 300 years. They just forgot to ask permission before they started acting like it was. He looked back at me, and this time his hand did touch. Fingers against my throat, finding my pulse. Checking. Counting. You were running from them, he said. Not a question. I managed a small nod. The wedding? Another nod. Something dark crossed his features. He turned his head slightly, speaking to his pack without breaking eye contact with me. Cameron, how long? Minutes, came the reply. Maybe 10 if we're lucky. She's lost too much. Can you move her? A pause. Not without killing her faster. The Alpha King's hand was still against my throat, warm despite the snow, despite everything. I felt the moment he made his decision. Something shifted in the air between us, some fundamental choice that changed the trajectory of everything that came after. "Then we stay," he said quietly. "Dominic," someone protested. "We stay." Each word carried the weight of absolute authority. Get the med kit from Cameron's pack. And someone find out what's taking Silas so long with those territory markers. If the Ashfords want to claim this land, they're going to have to go through me first. His thumb moved, gentle against my pulse point, and he leaned closer. His eyes held mine, and there was something in them I couldn't name. Something that made my failing heart stutter with an emotion that had nothing to do with fear. "Hold on," he said. And it sounded like a command, like an alpha's order that my wolf couldn't help but obey. "You made it this far. Don't you dare quit now." And despite everything, the cold, the pain, the darkness creeping in from all sides, I felt something in me respond, something that decided against all logic to keep fighting. I woke to warmth, not the false, treacherous warmth of hypothermia, but real heat, the kind that came from fur and fire and bodies designed to burn hotter than human. My first coherent thought was surprise that I'd woken at all. My second was confusion about the rough wool beneath my cheek and the steady rhythm of breathing that wasn't my own. I was alive. The realization hit me with enough force that I gasped and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through my abdomen, sharp and bright, dragging me fully into consciousness. My hands clutched at whatever I was lying on. Not snow, not ground, but fabric, a blanket. Multiple blankets, actually, wrapped around me so tightly I could barely move. "Easy." The voice came from above me, familiar, despite having heard it only once before. "Cameron stitched you up, but you need to stay still or you'll tear everything." I managed to open my eyes, though even that felt like a monumental effort. The world came into focus slowly. The dark canvas of a tent ceiling, the orange glow of a fire somewhere close. And him. Dominic sat against the tent's support pole, one leg drawn up, his arm resting casually across his knee. He was watching me with that same intense focus from the forest, like I was something that required his complete attention. In the firelight, his features were somehow softer and more dangerous all at once, shadows pooling in the hollows of his cheeks, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, making his amber eyes glow like a predator's in the dark. "Where?" My voice came out as a rasp. I tried to swallow, found my throat desert dry. He moved before I'd finished the question, reaching for something beside him. A water skin appeared in his hand, and he was beside me in one fluid motion, crouching down to slip a hand behind my head and tilt the container to my lips. "Slowly," he instructed as I drank. "Small sips. Your body's been through hell." The water was cold and perfect. I managed 3 swallows before he pulled it away, ignoring my weak sound of protest. "More in a few minutes," he said, settling back but staying close. "Cameron said too much at once will make you sick." "Cameron," I repeated, testing the name, trying to piece together what had happened after I'd passed out. "My second. He's had field medic training." Dominic's expression shifted, something almost like amusement flickering across it. "Also happens to be the packmate who wanted to leave you in the snow." I should have felt fear at that. Instead, I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my chest. "Good to know." He changed his mind. Dominic's tone was neutral, but there was something underneath it. "After he saw what your stepfather's allies did to your insides." The laugh died. My hands found my stomach automatically, feeling the bulk of bandages beneath the blankets. "How bad?" "Bad enough that Cameron wanted to shift you to wolf form to accelerate the healing. I wouldn't let him." I looked up sharply, ignoring the way the movement made my vision swim. "Why not?" His eyes held mine. "Because you'd been running for 5 miles with internal bleeding. Your wolf was already exhausted trying to keep you alive. Forcing a shift in that condition would have killed you." The weight of that settled over me. He'd made a medical decision, yes, but also a strategic one, keeping me human, vulnerable, when transforming might have saved me faster. It spoke to either genuine concern or a long game I didn't understand yet. "So you just stayed, with me bleeding out in enemy territory." "This isn't enemy territory." That edge was back in his voice, the one that made my wolf perk up and pay attention. "And yes, we stayed. The Ashfords sent trackers, found our markers instead." He said it calmly, like he was discussing the weather. Silas had a conversation with them about respecting boundaries. They went back. I stared at him. A conversation. Silas is very persuasive. The way he said it made me think persuasive involved teeth and blood and the kind of dominance display that ended with submission or death. I should have been horrified. Instead, I felt something uncomfortably close to gratitude. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Why would you risk your pack for someone you don't know? For an Ashford bride? Something flickered in his expression. There and gone too fast to identify. He leaned back slightly, studying me with that unnerving intensity. You're not an Ashford anything, he said finally. You were running from them. That makes you something else entirely. It makes me a political disaster, I corrected. Rowan Ashford was supposed to bind 2 packs together. Now I'm here, wherever here is, probably starting a war. There's already a war. His voice went flat, cold. It's been brewing for 20 years, ever since the Ashfords decided ancient treaties were suggestions and started expanding into territories their grandfathers swore they'd never touch. You're not the cause, little wolf. You're just the excuse they would have used eventually. Little wolf. The endearment, if it was one, made something flutter in my chest. I pushed it down, forced myself to focus. So what now? You send me back? Use me as a bargaining chip? Is that what you think I'd do? I don't know what you'd do. I don't know you. No, he agreed. You don't. But I know you ran 5 miles through snow in a nightdress rather than marry into that family. I know you have scars on your wrists that look like restraints and a fracture in your collarbone that healed wrong because no one said it properly. I know. He stopped himself, jaw tightening. I know enough. The tent felt suddenly smaller. The fire outside crackled, and somewhere beyond the canvas, I could hear low voices. His pack, probably. Keeping watch. Protecting their alpha while he sat here with a stranger who could destroy everything. My name, I said quietly, is Elena. Elena Thorne. If you're going to decide my fate, you should at least know that much. Elena. He tested it. The syllables rough in his mouth like he was learning a new language. The Thorne pack. Your father is Matthias. Was my father. I corrected. He died when I was 12. My stepmother's family absorbed what was left of his pack. I'm just a remnant. A useful one, apparently, for making alliances. Dominic's expression darkened. And Rowan Ashford, what was he to you? The question hung in the air between us. I could lie, make it sound better than it was, but something about the way he'd asked, the careful control in his voice, made me want to be honest, a nightmare I'd been told to accept. I met his eyes. He hurt me. Not enough to break the engagement, just enough to make sure I knew my place. The servants whispered about his first betrothed. Said she died in an accident, but you knew better. I nodded. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, like he was seeing something beyond the tent walls. When he spoke again, his voice was soft and absolutely lethal. He won't touch you again. It wasn't a promise. It was a fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who'd never failed to enforce their will. And despite every logical reason I had to be afraid of this man, this alpha king who ruled territories my father had warned me against, I believed him. I should sleep, I said finally, because the alternative was asking questions I wasn't ready to hear the answers to. Cameron probably prescribed rest along with the stitches. He did. Dominic stood in one smooth motion, reaching for the water skin again. Drink a bit more first, then sleep. I'll be here. You're staying? The words came out more vulnerable than I intended. He paused, looking down at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Where else would I be? Leading your pack, making war plans, literally anywhere but babysitting a half-dead refugee. My pack can manage without me for a few hours, and you're not half-dead anymore. Cameron's optimistic you'll be arguing with him by tomorrow. He crouched beside me again, offering the water. As for babysitting, I've had worse assignments. I drank. Let him settle me back into the blankets when I was done. My eyes were already drifting closed, exhaustion pulling me under despite my attempts to stay alert. In that space between waking and sleeping, I felt him adjust the furs around my shoulders, his hands gentle, careful not to jostle my injuries. Elena, he said quietly, and I struggled to surface enough to hear him. That note. The one warning you about Rowan. Do you know who sent it? I shook my head slightly. Servant's paper. Feminine handwriting. That's all I know. He sounded thoughtful. Rest now. We'll talk more when you're stronger. I wanted to ask what we'd talk about. What he planned to do with me. Where this all ended. But sleep was claiming me with iron claws, dragging me down into darkness that felt safer than it should have. The last thing I felt was his hand, warm against my shoulder, and his voice, so quiet I might have imagined it. You're safe now. I swear it. I woke to voices, low, urgent, and decidedly unhappy. Insane. Even for you. The Ashfords are mobilizing their allies. This isn't just about territory anymore, Dominic. You've taken his bride. I took a dying wolf who was bleeding out on our land. That was Dominic, his tone glacial. There's a difference. Is there? A new voice, younger, with an edge of frustration, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've declared war over a girl you don't even know. Watch your tone, Owen. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. What's the play here? We keep her? Send her back? Use her as leverage? Because right now we're sitting on a powder keg and you're lighting matches. Silence. Then Dominic, quieter but somehow more dangerous. The play is that she stays until she's healed. After that, she makes her own choice. Her own choice? That was Cameron, the one who'd stitched me up. Dominic, she's a pawn, has been her whole life. Girls like that don't know how to make choices. They know how to survive. Then maybe, Dominic said, ice in every syllable. It's time someone taught her the difference. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing steady, but my heart was racing. They were right. I was a powder keg. A political disaster wrapped in bandages and borrowed furs. The smart thing would be to slip away as soon as I could walk, disappear before I brought war down on people who'd saved my life for reasons I still didn't understand. The smart thing. But I'd been doing the smart thing my entire life, and it had led me to bleeding out in the snow. Maybe it was time to try something different. 3 days after waking in Dominic's tent, I was finally allowed to stand. Cameron had protested, of course. He'd spent the better part of an hour lecturing me about internal sutures and the dangers of premature movement, while checking my bandages with the clinical detachment of someone who'd decided I was a particularly inconvenient medical case, rather than a person. But even he couldn't deny that my wolf was healing me faster than expected, knitting together the damage that should have taken weeks. You're lucky, he'd said, though his tone suggested luck had nothing to do with it. Whatever bloodline you inherited, it's strong. Probably the only reason you survived the run at all. I hadn't mentioned my mother. Didn't tell him that she'd been from one of the old families, the ones who could trace their lineage back, before the territories fractured into packs and politics. My father had loved that about her, right up until loving her had gotten her killed. Some inheritances came with a price. Now, standing outside the tent for the first time, I understood exactly where I'd ended up. Dominic's camp wasn't the temporary military outpost I'd imagined. It was a settlement, built into the mountainside with a permanence that spoke of years, maybe decades. Stone foundations supported wooden structures that seemed to grow from the landscape itself. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys. I could see training grounds, storage buildings, what looked like a communal hall. This wasn't a pack. It was a kingdom. Impressive, isn't it? The voice came from my left, Owen, the younger wolf who'd questioned Dominic's decision to keep me. He was leaning against a post, arms crossed, watching me with undisguised suspicion. Took 15 years to build. Blood, sweat, and determination from every wolf who calls this place home. It's beautiful, I said honestly. It's survival. He pushed off the post, moving closer. Up close, he looked younger than he'd sounded during that argument, maybe mid-20s, with brown hair that needed cutting and eyes that held too much wariness for someone his age. The Northern Territories don't forgive weakness. You either adapt or you die. Sounds familiar. His expression flickered. Surprise, maybe, or reluctant understanding. I suppose it does. Look, Elena. You want to know what my intentions are. I finished for him, whether I'm a spy, a liability, or just stupid enough to think I can hide here forever? All of the above? But there was less hostility in it now, more curiosity. I turned to face him fully, ignoring the pull of still healing muscles. I don't know what I am. A week ago, I was preparing to marry a man who would have killed me eventually. 3 days ago, I was dying in the snow. Now I'm here, in a place my father told me stories about like it was the end of the world. I met his eyes. So no, I don't have intentions. I'm just trying to figure out how to still be breathing tomorrow. Owen studied me for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, quick and genuine. Fair enough. Come on. If you're going to be standing, you might as well walk. Cameron will have both our heads if you collapse, but Dominic wants to see you. My heart did something stupid at that. Where is he? The Overlook. It's where he goes to think. Owen started walking, adjusting his pace when he noticed my limp. Word of advice? Don't lie to him. He can smell deception like most people smell rain coming. It's unsettling. I'll keep that in mind. The path wound upward through the settlement, and I noticed things as we walked. Children playing near one of the houses, their laughter bright against the snow. A woman hanging laundry, who watched me pass with more curiosity than fear. 2 men sparring in the training grounds. Their movements fluid and deadly and somehow beautiful. Everyone we passed acknowledged Owen with a nod or a word, but their eyes always found me afterward. Measuring. Wondering. I kept my head up, my shoulders back, even though every instinct screamed to make myself smaller, invisible. They're not hostile, Owen said quietly. Just careful. We've had trouble with outsiders before. What kind of trouble? The kind that starts with open doors and ends with funerals. His jaw tightened. The Ashfords aren't the only pack that thinks the Northern Territories are up for grabs. We've fought off 3 incursions in the last 5 years. Lost good people defending our borders. I'm sorry. He glanced at me, something softer in his expression. Not your fault. But you can understand why your presence here makes people nervous. You're connected to the very pack that's been pushing hardest against our boundaries. I was a prisoner, not a collaborator. I know. Dominic made that clear. Doesn't change the politics, though. We'd reached a narrow trail that led away from the main settlement, climbing higher into the rocks. He's up there. Just follow the path. I'll wait here. He'll want to talk to you alone. I wanted to ask what we'd talk about, what happened next, but Owen was already turning back. So I climbed, each step sending small protests through my healing body, until the path opened onto a flat outcropping of stone. The view stole what little breath I had left. The mountains spread out in every direction, peaks touching clouds, valleys filled with pine forests that looked black against the snow. I could see for miles, the whole of the Northern Territories laid out like a map, wild and untamed and absolutely breathtaking. Somewhere far below, I could make out the settlement, small and fragile against the vastness. And standing at the edge, silhouetted against all that sky, was Dominic. He didn't turn when I approached, though I knew he'd heard me. Wolves always heard everything. Instead, he kept his gaze on the horizon, his profile sharp against the afternoon light. My father stood here, he said quietly. The day he became Alpha, told me that leading a pack meant understanding what you were willing to die for. He paused. I asked him what he'd chosen. He pointed to all of this and said, everything you can see and everything you can't. I moved beside him carefully, maintaining a respectful distance. That's a lot of responsibility. It's an impossible responsibility. But it's mine. He finally looked at me, and the intensity in his amber eyes made my pulse quicken. How are you feeling? Sore, restless, alive. I managed a small smile. Cameron says I'm healing faster than expected. You have strong blood. It wasn't a question, but there was curiosity underneath it. My mother's line. She was from the Ravencrest family before... I stopped, unsure how much to share. Before they were massacred. His voice was gentle, but the words still hit like a blow. I know the story. 20 years ago. Territorial dispute over hunting grounds. The Ashfords claimed self-defense. They claimed a lot of things, my hands fisted at my sides. My mother was visiting my father when it happened. She was the only survivor because she wasn't there. It destroyed her, knowing she'd lived while her entire family died. She lasted 3 years after that before grief finished what violence started. Dominic finished softly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He was quiet for a moment then. My mother died when I was 16. Raiders from the Western Territories. They wanted our resources, our land. Thought killing the Alpha's mate would break us. His jaw tightened. It did break us. For a while. My father became someone else after that. Harder. More ruthless. He taught me that mercy was weakness. That the only way to protect what you loved was to eliminate threats before they could strike. Is that what you believe? His eyes met mine. I believed it. Until I found you bleeding in the snow, and every tactical reason I had to leave you there didn't matter as much as the fact that you'd fought so hard to survive. My breath caught. The weight of that confession hung between us, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to examine. Dominic, the Ashfords sent an envoy yesterday. He interrupted, looking back at the mountains. Formal request for your return. They're calling it a kidnapping, threatening sanctions, alliance pressure, possible military action if we don't comply. My stomach dropped. You should send me back. Should I? Yes. I'm not worth a war. I'm not worth any of this. He turned to me so fast I stumbled back a step. His hand shot out, catching my arm before I could fall, steadying me with a gentleness that contradicted the sudden intensity in his expression. Don't, he said, voice low and fierce. Don't reduce yourself to a political calculation. You're not a bargaining chip or a war trigger or whatever else you've been told you are. You're Elena Thorne, daughter of Matthias, last of the Ravencrest bloodline through your mother, and you survived something that would have killed most wolves. That doesn't change reality. The Ashfords want me back. Your pack is at risk because of me. My pack is at risk because the Ashfords have been aggressive expansionists for 2 decades, and this was inevitable. His thumb moved against my arm, probably unconsciously. You're just the excuse. If it wasn't you, it would have been something else. A border dispute. A hunting violation. A perceived slight. They want our territory, Elena. They always have. Then why keep me? Why not use me as leverage, negotiate some kind of... Because you asked me not to send you back. His eyes held mine, amber fire in the fading light. You didn't say it out loud, but when I found you, when you looked at me and said please, you weren't asking me to save your life. You were asking me not to send you back to them. And I won't. Not unless you tell me that's what you want. The wind picked up, pulling at my hair, and I realized how close we were standing. Close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, the way his jaw tensed when he was trying to control something. I don't know what I want, I admitted. I've never been allowed to want anything. Then take time to figure it out. Stay here, heal, learn what it's like to make choices instead of having them made for you. His hand slipped from my arm, but the warmth remained. The Ashfords can wait. Let them posture and threaten. We've weathered worse. And if they attack? Something predatory flickered across his face. Then they'll learn why the Northern Territories have stayed independent for 300 years. A howl echoed from somewhere in the valley below, long and rising, carrying a message I didn't fully understand but felt in my bones. Dominic's head turned sharply, his entire body tensing. What is it? Patrol alert. He was already moving, his hand finding mine automatically, pulling me with him. Someone's approaching the outer markers. Multiple wolves. We ran, or rather, he ran, and I stumbled along, trying to keep up despite the protest of healing muscles. By the time we reached the settlement, his pack was already mobilizing. Cameron appeared with weapons, Owen was shouting orders, and everywhere I looked, wolves were moving with the practiced efficiency of a military unit. How many? Dominic demanded. 6, maybe 7. That was Silas, the one he'd mentioned before. He was older than the others, gray threading through his dark hair, with scars that spoke of decades of fighting. They're not trying to hide their approach. Sent a messenger ahead requesting parley. Ashford wolves? Eastern Territory markers, yes. But Silas paused, his expression troubled. The messenger claims they're defectors. Says they have information about Rowan Ashford that we need to hear. Dominic's hand tightened around mine. It could be a trap. Could be, Silas agreed. Or it could be legitimate. The messenger knew details about Elena's escape. Things only someone from inside the Ashford compound would know. Every eye turned to me. I felt the weight of their attention, their suspicion, their fear that I'd brought danger right to their door. And maybe I had. Maybe everything Dominic had risked was about to blow up in all our faces. Let them approach, Dominic said finally. But full combat readiness. If this goes wrong, I want containment protocols in place. Dominic, Cameron started. They came for information. Let's hear what they have to say. His eyes found mine, and something in them made my heart ache. Elena, stay with Owen. If things turn hostile, I know. Get to safety. I pulled my hand from his, even though it hurt to do it. Be careful. He smiled, quick and devastating. Always. Then he was moving, his pack flowing around him like water, and I was left standing with Owen, watching as they prepared to meet wolves who might be allies or enemies or something worse. This is my fault, I said quietly. Owen didn't disagree, but his tone was gentler than expected. Maybe. Or maybe this was always coming. Either way, we'll handle it. That's what packs do. I watched Dominic's figure disappear toward the outer markers and felt something shift inside me. These wolves, his pack, were risking everything because their alpha had made a choice in the snow 3 days ago. Because he'd seen me as something worth saving. The least I could do was be worth it. The defectors arrived at sunset, their silhouettes stark against the orange bleeding sky. From where Owen had positioned me, inside the communal hall with a clear view through the windows but protected by stone walls and armed guards, I could see Dominic's pack arranged in a loose semicircle, weapons visible but not drawn. A show of strength wrapped in the pretense of hospitality, Dominic stood at the center, and even from a distance, his authority was palpable. He didn't need to posture or threaten. His mere presence made the message clear. This is my territory, and you exist here only because I allow it. The approaching wolves moved cautiously, their body language submissive, heads slightly lowered, movements slow and deliberate. 6 of them, like Silas had reported. 5 men and 1 woman. The woman walked slightly ahead, her dark hair braided back, her clothes worn but well made. Even in submission, she carried herself with a dignity that spoke of status. That's Victoria Ashford, Owen said quietly beside me. He'd refused to leave me alone, claiming orders from Dominic, though I suspected it was more personal concern than duty. Rowan's cousin. She's 3rd in line for their alpha position. My stomach tightened. She's high-ranking. If she's defecting, then something's very wrong in the Ashford pack. Owen's expression was grim. High-ranking wolves don't abandon their families unless staying becomes more dangerous than leaving. Through the window, I watched as Victoria stopped at the appropriate distance, close enough to speak, far enough to show she wasn't presuming on Dominic's hospitality. She said something I couldn't hear, and Dominic tilted his head, listening. Then his gaze cut suddenly toward the hall, toward the windows where I stood, toward me. They're asking for you, Owen said, though I'd already guessed. Dominic will refuse. Protocol dictates, take me out there. He turned to stare at me. Absolutely not. If this is a trap, then they already know I'm here. Hiding accomplishes nothing except making me look like a coward. I met his eyes, channeling every ounce of the composure my father had tried to teach me before he died. I need to hear what they have to say, and they need to see that I chose to come here, that I wasn't kidnapped. Elena, please. I softened my voice. I know you're trying to protect me, but I can't let Dominic fight my battles when I don't even know what those battles are. Owen looked torn, his loyalty to his alpha warring with whatever instinct made him want to help me. Finally, he cursed under his breath and gestured to the guards. Stay close. At the first sign of aggression, you get behind me. Understood? I nodded. The evening air was cold against my face as we stepped outside. Every wolf in the clearing turned to watch our approach. Dominic's pack with varying degrees of concern, the defectors with expressions ranging from relief to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. Dominic's jaw tightened when he saw me, but he didn't order me back. Instead, He shifted slightly, creating space for me to stand beside him while maintaining his position between me and the Ashford wolves. "Elena Thorne," Victoria said, her voice carrying easily across the distance. "I'm glad to see you alive. When they found your blood trail ending at the northern markers, most assumed the worst. Most assumed correctly," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I nearly died. The Alpha King and his pack saved my life." Something flickered in Victoria's expression. Approval, maybe. She looked at Dominic. "Then we owe you a debt. Elena is precious to those of us who knew her mother." That caught me off guard. "You knew my mother?" "I was young when she visited our territory, but yes, she was kind to me when few others were." Victoria's eyes held mine. "That's partly why I'm here, why we're all here. Because what Rowan planned for you, what he's done to others, it's an abomination that stains our entire pack." "Careful," Dominic said, his voice soft and dangerous. "You're about to accuse your own blood of crimes. Be very certain of your words." "I am certain." Victoria straightened, and I saw the fear in her eyes warring with determination. "Rowan Ashford has killed 3 intended mates in the last 4 years. The first was ruled an accident, a fall during a hunt. The second, a sudden illness that no healer could explain. The third—" She paused, swallowing hard. "The third tried to run, like Elena. They found her body 3 days later. The official report said she was attacked by rogues." "And unofficially?" Dominic's voice had gone glacial. "Unofficially, there were bruises that matched Rowan's hands, wounds that came from teeth we all recognized." One of the men behind Victoria spoke up, his voice rough. "I was part of the search party. I saw what was done to her. That wasn't rogues. That was rage. My legs felt suddenly weak. 3 women. 3 lives ended because they'd been given to a monster wearing a civilized face." "Why didn't you come forward?" Cameron demanded. "If you knew—" "And say what? Accuse the Alpha's heir based on suspicion? Challenge pack law with no proof?" Victoria's laugh was bitter. "The Ashford pack isn't like yours, Alpha Dominic. Dissent is punished. Questions are silenced. Those who speak against the leadership tend to disappear, or have accidents of their own." "So you waited until a 4th woman nearly died," Silas said coldly. "No." Victoria's voice cracked. "We waited until we had proof. Real, undeniable proof. That's what I'm offering you now." She reached into her jacket slowly, carefully, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Even from a distance, I could see it was official pack stationery, sealed with wax. "This is a letter from Rowan to his father, written 2 days after Elena's escape. In it, he outlines his preferences regarding his future mates, what he requires in terms of obedience, what he does when that obedience isn't freely given." Victoria's hand shook slightly. "It's detailed, specific, and it matches exactly what was done to the previous 3 women." The clearing had gone silent, except for the wind moving through the pines. "Why bring it to me?" Dominic asked. "Why not take it to your own Alpha, demand justice within your pack?" "Because his father already knows." The words fell like stones. "He's known for years. He considers it a character flaw to be managed, not a crime to be punished. As long as Rowan eventually produces an heir, the leadership doesn't care how many women die in the process." I felt sick, actually physically sick, my stomach churning with the realization of how close I'd come to being number 4. Dominic's hand found my elbow, steadying me without drawing attention to the gesture. "Elena?" "I'm fine," I managed, though we both knew it was a lie. "We couldn't stay," one of the other defectors said, "not after that. Not knowing what they'd do to Victoria for stealing the letter. So we ran. Came here because we heard rumors that you'd taken Elena in, that you'd refused the Ashford demands for her return." "The enemy of my enemy," Cameron muttered. "We're not asking for sanctuary out of convenience," Victoria said sharply. "We're offering you leverage. That letter proves what Rowan is, what the Ashford leadership is willing to overlook. Present it to the Council of Alphas, and you can destroy their credibility, maybe even their alliances. Or," Silas countered, "it could be a forgery, a convenient piece of evidence delivered right to our door by wolves who conveniently defected at the perfect moment. Test it." Victoria's eyes flashed. Have your experts verify the seal, the handwriting, the paper stock. We'll submit to truth trials if necessary. We're not lying. Dominic was quiet, his thumb moving absently against my elbow as he thought. I could feel the tension radiating from him, the weight of a decision that would affect every wolf under his protection. Owen, he said finally. Take them to the guest quarters, separate rooms, guards on each door. Cameron, I want that letter authenticated. Silas, background checks on all of them. I want to know if there's any connection to past incidents or suspected spies. And if they're legitimate? Owen asked. Then we have a conversation about what happens next. Dominic looked at Victoria. You'll stay here while we verify your claims. You'll be treated as guests, not prisoners, but you'll be watched. Any hint of deception or danger to my pack, and you'll discover exactly how we handle threats in the Northern Territories. Clear? Victoria bowed her head. Crystal clear, Alpha. Thank you for hearing us. As Owen began organizing the defectors' accommodation, Dominic turned to me. Up close, I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes searched my face for signs of distress. Come with me, he said quietly. I followed him away from the clearing, back toward the path that led to the overlook. Neither of us spoke until we were far enough away that conversations couldn't reach us, alone with just the darkening sky and the sound of wind through stone. I'm sorry, he said finally. I blinked. For what? For making you hear that, about the other women. About what? His hands fisted at his sides. About what would have happened if you'd married him. I already knew. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Maybe not the specifics, but I knew he was dangerous. That's why I ran. You shouldn't have had to run. You shouldn't have been put in that position at all. He turned to face me fully, and the raw anger in his expression wasn't directed at me, but at every circumstance that had led to that moment in the snow. Your family should have protected you. The pack leadership should have investigated. Someone should have... But no one did. I cut him off gently, because I wasn't worth protecting. I was just a tool for an alliance, and tools don't get to complain about how they're used. You're not a tool. I know that now. I took a step closer, drawn by something I couldn't name, because you showed me I wasn't. When you stayed with me in the snow, when you brought me here, when you gave me the choice to leave or stay, you treated me like a person, not a political pawn. That's worth more than you know. His eyes held mine, and I watched something shift in them. Elena. A howl cut through the air, sharp and urgent, the kind that meant danger. Dominic's head snapped toward the settlement, every muscle in his body coiling for action. Stay here, he ordered, already moving. Like hell. I was right behind him, ignoring the pull of healing injuries. If something's wrong, then I need to know you're safe. We were running now, racing back down the path. Other wolves were converging on the main square, drawn by that same urgent call. I could hear shouting, the clash of metal, and underneath it all, a sound that made my blood run cold. Rowan's voice. Don't care about your territory laws or your pathetic posturing. That's my bride you're harboring, and I've come to collect what's mine. We burst into the square to find chaos. Rowan stood in the center with at least a dozen Ashford wolves flanking him, all armed, all radiating aggression. Dominic's pack had responded in force, weapons drawn, forming a protective barrier around the settlement. And Rowan, gods, I'd almost forgotten how he looked. Handsome in a cold way, with sharp features and pale eyes that promised cruelty. He was scanning the crowd, hunting, and when his gaze found me, his smile was razor thin. There she is, he purred. My runaway bride. I was so worried, Elna. Thought you might have been hurt when you disappeared on our wedding day. Dominic moved in front of me before I could respond, his body a wall between us. You're not welcome here, Ashford. Leave. Now. I don't think so. Rowan's eyes never left me, even as he addressed Dominic. You see, Elena and I have a contract, a binding agreement between our families. Breaking that contract has consequences. Or did you think stealing another alpha's intended mate would go unanswered? She's not your anything, Dominic said, voice dropping into that dangerous register that made every wolf instinct sit up and take notice. She came here of her own will. She stays of her own will. You have no claim. I have every claim. The contract was negotiated with her stepmother, not with Elena herself. She was never given a choice. Cameron stepped forward, his voice cold and clinical. Under pack law, forced bonding contracts can be dissolved if one party can prove duress or danger. Rowan's expression darkened. Careful, pup. You're making accusations you can't prove. Can't we? Victoria's voice rang out as she pushed through the crowd, the letter held high. Because I have proof right here of exactly what kind of mate you are, cousin. The temperature in the square seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rowan's eyes locked on Victoria, and the rage that twisted his features was absolutely feral. You traitorous bitch. Truth hurts, doesn't it? Victoria moved to stand with Dominic's pack, her own defectors backing her. Tell them about the others, Rowan. Tell them about the women who died because they weren't afraid enough, or obedient enough, or broken enough for your tastes. I don't have to explain myself to defectors and thieves, but there was panic underneath the rage now, barely contained. Elena belongs to me. The contract is void. Dominic's voice cut through everything, absolute and final. Elena Thorne is under my protection. She remains here as my guest until such time as she chooses otherwise. If you have a legal challenge, present it to the Council of Alphas. Until then, you're trespassing on sovereign territory with armed wolves. Leave now, or we'll remove you by force. For a moment, I thought Rowan would attack. His body tensed, his wolves shifting into ready positions, and the air crackled with the promise of violence. Then his eyes found mine again, and he smiled. It was the smile I'd seen in our private meetings, the one that came before the too tight grips and the casual cruelties. This isn't over, Elena. You can hide behind your northern savages, but eventually, you'll have to face the consequences of what you've done. And when you do, he leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying just to me. I'll make sure you regret every day you ran from me. Then he turned and walked away, his wolves following, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. I realized I was shaking. Dominic's hand found mine, warm and solid and real. He's gone, he said quietly. You're safe. But as I watched Rowan's figure disappear into the darkness beyond the settlement, I knew the truth. This was just beginning. The Council of Alphas convened 3 weeks later, in neutral territory 200 miles south of Dominic's settlement. 3 weeks of preparation, of authenticating Victoria's evidence, of gathering testimonies from wolves who'd witnessed the Ashford crimes but been too afraid to speak. 3 weeks of watching Dominic transform from the quietly intense alpha who'd saved my life into something harder, more calculating, a king preparing for war. And 3 weeks of me trying to figure out where I fit in all of it. You don't have to come. Dominic stood in the doorway of the small cabin they'd given me, my own space, away from the main settlement, with windows that overlooked the valley and a fireplace that kept the mountain cold at bay. He'd taken to checking on me each evening, these quiet moments that felt stolen from the chaos of preparation. The council will hear the evidence regardless. You being there puts you at risk. Rowan will be there. I didn't look up from the bag I was packing. If I'm not, he'll claim I was coerced, that you're holding me against my will. Let him claim it. The evidence speaks for itself, does it? I finally met his eyes. You have a letter and testimonies from defectors. Rowan has a contract and the support of 3 allied packs. Without me there to confirm that I chose to leave, that I was never kidnapped, this becomes a political debate instead of what it really is. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes searching my face. In the firelight, the angles of his features seemed softer, though no less intense. You've changed, he said finally. What do you mean? When I found you in the snow, you could barely look me in the eye. Now you're packing a bag to face down a council of alphas and the man who wanted to kill you. A small smile touched his lips. You're braver than you think, Elena Thorne. Heat crept up my neck. I'm terrified, actually. I just got better at hiding it. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. He moved into the room, close enough that I could smell pine and smoke and something uniquely him. But I meant what I said. You don't owe us this. You don't owe me this. Maybe not. I folded the last shirt into my bag, taking my time with it so I didn't have to look at him. But those other women, the ones who died, they don't get to testify. I do. So I will. His hand found my chin, tilting my face up until I had no choice but to meet his gaze. The touch was gentle, but the intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. If anything happens, he said softly, if at any point you feel unsafe, you get behind me. You run if I tell you to run. You don't argue. You don't hesitate. Promise me. Dominic. Promise me, Elena. The way he said my name, rough and desperate and something else I was afraid to name, made my heart stutter. I promise. He nodded, but his hand didn't drop. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, and I watched something war in his expression, something that made the air between us feel suddenly charged. I should go, he said finally. But he didn't move. Neither did I. The moment stretched, fragile and electric, filled with all the things we hadn't said over the past 3 weeks, the conversations that went too long, the accidental touches that felt deliberate, the way he looked at me sometimes like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve but desperately wanted to. Then Cameron's voice echoed from outside. Dominic, we need you in the strategy room. And the spell broke. Dominic stepped back, his hand falling away, and I felt the loss of his touch like cold water. Tomorrow morning. We leave at dawn. I'll be ready. He paused in the doorway, looking back. Elena, thank you. For doing this. For choosing to fight instead of hide. Then he was gone, and I was alone with the fire and my thoughts and the undeniable truth that I'd started feeling things for Dominic Blackthorne that went far beyond gratitude. The council hall was built from ancient stone, situated in a valley that belonged to no pack, and therefore to all packs. Neutral ground, sanctified by treaties older than living memory. As Dominic's convoy approached, 10 vehicles carrying his elite guard, Victoria and her defectors, and me, I could see other packs arriving as well. The Southern Territories with their polished carriages, the Eastern Territories with military precision, the Western Territories in practical trucks that had seen better days, and the Ashfords. I spotted their banner before I saw Rowan, silver wolf on black background, the same emblem that had hung in my childhood home after the marriage contract was signed. They'd brought a full delegation, at least 30 wolves, making a show of force that was probably against council protocols, but no one would challenge. Stay close, Owen murmured as we exited the vehicles. He'd been assigned as my personal guard, along with Silas, both of them flanking me like I was something precious that needed protecting. The moment we're inside, you stay within arm's reach of Dominic at all times. I nodded, trying to ignore the way my hands wanted to shake. The council chamber was circular, with raised seating arranged in tiers, so every pack representative could see and be seen. At the center sat the 5 elder alphas, who presided over disputes, ancient wolves who'd survived long enough to be considered neutral arbiters. They watched with eyes that had seen centuries of pack politics, wars, alliances forged and broken. Dominic's delegation was seated in the northern section, and I felt every eye in the room track my movement as I took my seat beside him. Whispers rippled through the assembly. The runaway bride, the northern king's prize, the political disaster waiting to happen. Across the circle, Rowan watched me with those cold, pale eyes, a smile playing at his lips. The council recognizes the petition from Alpha Dominic Blackthorne of the Northern Territories, one of the elders announced, her voice carrying easily through the chamber. State your claim. Dominic stood, and the room seemed to shift with him. He commanded attention effortlessly, every inch the Alpha King his father had trained him to be. I petition the council to void the marriage contract between Elena Thorne and Rowan Ashford on the grounds that the contract was coerced and that Rowan Ashford presents a clear danger to his intended mate's life. The formal words made it sound clean, legal. They didn't capture the snow or the blood or the terror. That's a serious accusation, another elder said. What evidence do you present? Cameron stepped forward with the letter, authenticated by 3 independent experts. Victoria gave her testimony, calm and clear despite the way Rowan's wolves glared at her. The other defectors spoke of what they'd witnessed, the suspicious deaths, the culture of silence that protected a predator. And through it all, I watched Rowan. Watched him sit there with perfect composure, occasionally whispering to his father, as if this was merely a nuisance rather than an indictment of everything he was. "Interesting stories," Rowan's father, Alpha Marcus Ashford, said when they'd finished. He stood slowly, commanding attention through sheer presence. He was older than Dominic, gray threading through his dark hair, with the kind of authority that came from decades of unchallenged rule. Stories from defectors and traitors, supported by a letter that could easily have been forged. "You'll forgive me if I don't find this compelling." "The letter was authenticated," Cameron said coldly, "by experts you hired. How convenient." Marcus smiled, all teeth and no warmth. "Let's discuss what actually happened, shall we?" Elena Thorne entered into a legally binding contract. On the day of her wedding, she fled, not because she was in danger, but because she got cold feet. Understandable for a young woman facing such a commitment. What's not understandable is the Northern King kidnapping her instead of returning her to her rightful place. "I wasn't kidnapped," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. The room went silent. Every eye turned to me, and I felt Dominic's hand close around my wrist. Warning or support, I wasn't sure. "Then explain, child, why you ran." Marcus's voice was patronizing, dismissive. "Explain why you disappeared on your wedding day and ended up in the Northern Territories, of all places." I stood slowly, Dominic rising with me, his hand still on my wrist. "I ran because I was afraid, not of marriage, of him." I pointed at Rowan. "He hurt me during our courtship. Small things at first, grips that were too tight, words that cut too deep, then bigger things. He broke my rib during one of our walks, told me it was an accident, that I'd fallen. Warned me that if I told anyone differently, worse would happen." "You have no proof of this," Rowan said, his voice smooth as silk. "Don't I?" I pulled up my sleeve, showing the silvered scars on my wrist. "These are from restraints, from being tied to a chair in your father's study while you explained exactly what you expected from a wife. How obedience wasn't negotiable, how defiance had consequences." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, surprised that I was fighting back. "And the wedding day," I continued, my voice stronger now. "I received a note, a warning that you'd killed your previous intended, that I would be next if I went through with the ceremony. So yes, I ran. I ran 5 miles through snow in a nightdress, because dying from cold seemed preferable to dying from you." "This is absurd," Marcus blustered. "A note? More convenient evidence that I sent the note." The voice came from the entrance, and every head turned. A young woman stood there, dark hair pulled back, wearing the simple dress of an Ashford servant. She was shaking, but her chin was raised, defiant. "Who are you?" one of the elders demanded. "Sarah Winters. I work in the Ashford household. Have for 6 years." She moved into the chamber slowly, like each step took courage. "I sent Elena the note because I watched what Rowan did to his last betrothed. I cleaned up the blood after he lost his temper. I was ordered to stay silent, threatened with exile or worse if I spoke. But I couldn't." Her voice broke. "I couldn't let it happen again, so I warned her." The chamber exploded into noise. Accusations, denials, demands for order. Through it all, I watched Rowan's composure finally crack. Watched rage twist his features into something ugly and honest. "Enough!" The head elder's voice cut through the chaos. "We will hear from Rowan Ashford. Approach and answer these charges." Rowan stood, and even now, he tried to maintain that civilized facade. "These are lies, fabrications from jealous rivals and disgruntled servants. I loved Elena. I wanted to build a life with her. If she misunderstood my affection as something sinister, you told me exactly how you'd kill me," I interrupted, my voice carrying clearly. "If I ever tried to leave, you said you'd make it look like an accident, just like you did with the others. You said no one would believe a word I said because you were the Alpha's son, and I was nothing." "Prove it," Rowan snarled, the facade crumbling. prove any of it, you lying little... The council has heard sufficient testimony, the head elder announced. We will deliberate. All parties will... No. Rowan's voice was quiet, but it stopped everyone. He was looking at me now, really looking. And the expression on his face made ice crawl down my spine. She wants proof? Fine. I challenge Dominic Blackthorne to ritual combat. If he wins, the contract is void and Elena goes free. If I win... His smile was terrible. Elena returns with me, and everyone here shuts up about what happens behind closed doors. The chamber erupted again. Dominic's hand tightened on my wrist, his body tensing like a predator ready to strike. You can't challenge an alpha king over a marriage dispute, Cameron protested. I can challenge anyone I want under pack law, Rowan shot back. Or has the mighty northern king forgotten tradition in his mountain fortress? Rowan, don't be foolish, Marcus started, but his son cut him off. I'm sick of this. Sick of politics and testimonies and playing civilized. She's mine by contract. He took her. So we settle it the old way. Combat. Tonight. Unless... He looked at Dominic. The Alpha King is afraid. Dominic released my wrist and stepped forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. When he spoke, his voice was soft and absolutely lethal. I accept. They held the ritual combat at moonrise, in the ancient circle behind the council hall. Wolves gathered from every pack, forming a ring around the fighting ground. Not seats or stands, but a living boundary of bodies and judgment. This was old magic, old law. Whatever happened here would be binding. I stood with Dominic's pack, Owen on one side and Victoria on the other, watching as the elders sanctified the circle with words in the old tongue. My heart was trying to pound its way out of my chest. He shouldn't be doing this, I whispered. This is my fight, my... It stopped being just your fight the moment he decided to keep you, Owen said quietly. Dominic doesn't do anything halfway. Your pack now, Elena. He protects what's his. What's his? The words sent warmth and terror through me in equal measure. Dominic and Rowan entered the circle from opposite sides. They'd both stripped down to combat pants, bare-chested despite the cold, and the contrast between them was striking. Rowan was lean, built for speed, with the kind of aesthetic musculature that came from training for appearance as much as function. Dominic was broader, heavier with muscle, covered in scars that spoke of real combat, real survival. First shift, the head elder announced. Combat continues until submission, death, or forfeit. Let the challenge begin. They circled each other, and I watched Dominic transform. Not into his wolf, not yet, but into something colder, more focused. Every trace of the man who'd been gentle with me, who'd held my hand and made me feel safe, was gone. This was the warrior his father had trained, the alpha who'd held the northern territories against decades of aggression. This was the monster my father had warned me about, except he was my monster, fighting for me. Rowan struck first, a testing lunge that Dominic sidestepped easily. They exchanged blows, fists and feet and brutal efficiency. And I realized with growing horror that Rowan was good, faster than he looked, with a vicious creativity to his attacks that spoke of someone who enjoyed causing pain. But Dominic was better. He didn't just fight, he dominated. Every movement was calculated, conserving energy while forcing Rowan to expend his. When he landed hits, they were precise, targeting injuries that would compound, weaken, slow. He was fighting smart, fighting patient, like he had all the time in the world. Then Rowan shifted. His wolf was silver-white, larger than I expected, with eyes that held all the cruelty of his human form. He launched at Dominic with jaws open, going for the throat, a killing strike right out of the gate. Dominic shifted mid-dodge, and his wolf was massive. Black as midnight with amber eyes that burned like fire, he met Rowan's attack head-on. The sound of their collision echoed through the circle, snarling, snapping, the wet sound of teeth finding flesh. I couldn't breathe, couldn't look away. They separated, circled again. Rowan was bleeding from a shoulder wound. Dominic's back leg favored slightly. Around the circle, wolves watched in absolute silence, witnessing old law play out the way it had for centuries. Rowan lunged again, and this time Dominic was ready. He twisted, impossibly fast for something his size, and caught Rowan's neck in his jaws. Not biting down, not yet, just holding. A clear message. I have you, submit. Rowan thrashed, clawing, desperate. Drew blood from Dominic's shoulder, his flank, fighting with the panic of someone who finally understood they were outmatched. Dominic held on. The seconds stretched. I watched Rowan's struggles grow weaker, watched the fight drain out of him as oxygen deprivation and blood loss took their toll. Watched Dominic maintain that perfect, controlled hold, enough pressure to dominate, not enough to kill, giving Rowan the choice. Finally, Rowan went limp. A whine escaped him, high and broken, the sound of submission. Dominic released him immediately, stepping back, his wolf's stance commanding, but not cruel. Rowan collapsed, shifted back to human form, gasping and bleeding in the dirt. Submit, the head elder called. The challenge goes to Alpha Dominic Blackthorn. The contract is void. The circle erupted. Some in celebration, others in outrage, most in the kind of relieved tension that came from witnessing violence but grateful it was over. Dominic shifted back to human form, accepting a cloak from Cameron, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found me. The relief in his expression was palpable. I pushed through the crowd, Silas and Owen clearing a path, until I stood at the circle's edge. Dominic met me there, and despite the blood and the exhaustion and the hundreds of witnesses, he pulled me close, his hand cradling the back of my head. It's over, he murmured against my hair. You're free. And I was. The contract was void. Rowan was defeated. I could go anywhere, do anything, choose any life I wanted. But as I stood there in Dominic's arms, surrounded by his pack, I realized I'd already made my choice. Had made it weeks ago in the snow, or maybe in the tent when he'd stayed with me, or on the overlook when he'd promised I could take time to figure out what I wanted. I wanted this, wanted him, wanted to be part of something that valued strength and loyalty, and the kind of courage that came from choosing to protect what mattered. Take me home, I said quietly. He pulled back just enough to look at me, and the hope in his eyes made my heart ache. Home? The Northern Territories. Your settlement? Wherever you are. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. Take me home, Dominic. He kissed me then, in front of the council, and every pack representative, and all the witnesses who would carry this story forward. Kissed me like I was something precious he'd fought for and won, something he'd never let go of. When we finally separated, Cameron was grinning. Owen was shaking his head with a smile, and even Silas looked pleased. Welcome to the pack, Elena, Cameron said. Hope you're ready for northern winters. They're brutal. I looked at Dominic, at the man who'd seen me dying in the snow, and decided I was worth saving. Who'd given me the choice to stay or go, to fight or hide, to be a victim or a survivor. I think I can handle it, I said. 6 months later, I stood on the overlook where Dominic had first brought me, watching the sun rise over the Northern Territories. The settlement had grown, new families arriving, drawn by the news that spread after the council meeting, that the Northern King had stood against corruption, had protected the vulnerable, had proven that the old laws still meant something. Arms wrapped around me from behind, familiar and warm. Couldn't sleep? Dominic's voice was rough from rest, his chin settling on my shoulder. Didn't want to. I leaned back into him. I like watching the mornings here, seeing everything wake up. His hands found mine, fingers intertwining. Cameron wants to know when you'll start training with the guard. Says you've got good instincts but need technique. Tell Cameron I'll start when he stops treating me like I'm made of glass. Dominic laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest into my back. I'll pass that along. Owen bet him you'd say something like that. I smiled, watching the light paint the mountains gold. Below, I could see smoke rising from chimneys, hear the distant sounds of the settlement waking. My home now. My pack. Dominic? Thank you. For finding me. For saving me. For giving me this. I turned in his arms, meeting those amber eyes that had first looked at me like I was a puzzle worth solving. For giving me a choice. He cupped my face in his hands, thumbs brushing my cheekbones. You saved yourself, Elena. You ran when it would have been easier to stay. You survived when dying would have been simpler. You fought when silence would have been safer. He kissed my forehead, gentle and reverent. I just made sure you had a place worth surviving for, and what a place it is. It's better with you in it. The sun cleared the mountains, and I kissed him, tasting morning and pine and the promise of all the days ahead, days where I wasn't a political pawn or a runaway bride or a victim waiting to happen. Just Elena. Elena Thorne, last of her mother's line, member of the Northern Pack, mate to an alpha king who'd seen her bleeding in the snow and decided she was worth fighting for. The girl who'd survived winter and found her strength in the cold. Behind us, the settlement woke fully. Children laughing, adults calling greetings, the sound of a community built on loyalty and choice, and the understanding that protecting what mattered was always worth the cost. I'd run 5 miles through snow to escape a nightmare, and I'd found a home,